never thought I'd be the forgotten daughter in my own family, but here I am. By day, I'm Fiona Moore, senior marketing manager at a tech company, competent, reliable, the one who always gets things done. By night, I'm something else entirely, the unpaid financial advisor, emotional mediator, and crisis manager for a family that barely acknowledges my existence. Last Christmas, for example, I handed James, my stepmother, $5,000 to fund a family trip. I thought it was a gift, a gesture to smooth over the usual tensions. Instead, I was sidelined during the celebrations, as invisible as the money I quietly contributed. James, the woman who married my father when I was 15, controls everything: the household, the narrative, the favor. Her biological children, Daniel and Sarah, bask in her approval while I'm left on the periphery, a shadow in their perfect family photo. But beneath my tired exterior, something stirs. I have a secret, a meticulous habit of gathering information, of keeping detailed records no one suspects I maintain. I track every slight, every dollar, every moment I'm pushed aside. It's a quiet power I've honed over years, and though my family doesn't see me, I see everything. Thanksgiving dinner looms, and I feel the familiar knot of dread tighten in my chest. Another battleground awaits, but this time, maybe I won't just endure. The roots of this family's dysfunction stretch back to that day my father married James. I was 15, already old enough to recognize the subtle shift in the household's atmosphere. James wasted no time favoring her own children, Daniel and Sarah, showering them with privileges and praise while I was dismissed as a mere afterthought. I remember my high school graduation painfully, the room filled with proud smiles, except for James. She openly compared my mediocre grades to my siblings' perfect scores in front of everyone, a jab that sliced through my confidence like a knife. At the time, I told myself it was just typical stepmother jealousy, that if I worked harder and kept my head down, I'd earn my place. So I became the responsible one, the steady anchor absorbing emotional labor no one else would touch. I carried the weight of their carefree lives on my shoulders, normalizing the imbalance because family meant compromise. But with each sacrifice, a quiet wound grew deeper inside me, masked beneath a fragile smile and a veneer of compliance. I buried my hurt, convincing myself this was the price of belonging in a family that never truly saw me. Determined not to be invisible, I threw myself into supporting the family, both emotionally and financially. I remember the day I paid off my father's $15,000 credit card debt, swallowing my own needs so he could keep his dignity. When Daniel's business venture crashed, I lent him $10,000 without hesitation, hoping he'd finally stand on his own. And Sarah's wedding, $25,000 I covered quietly, so the day could be perfect for her, even if I wasn't acknowledged. Despite all of it, my siblings shrugged, treating my generosity like an entitlement rather than a gift. James dismissed me as overbearing, the family busy reinforcing my role as the martyr no one thanked. My fiancé, Mark Bennett, is the only one who truly sees me. He admires my strength quietly, reminding me I'm worth more than the family's neglect. Mark listens as I spill my frustrations and encourages me to recognize my own value beyond the family's toxic expectations. I also have my secret weapon, the detailed records I keep, tracking every dollar spent, every slight endured, every favor given. It started as a way to protect myself mentally, but has become something more, a foundation for whatever comes next. For now, I still hold on to hope that my sacrifices will someday lead to acceptance. The first real crack in my resolve came at a family barbecue, surrounded by cousins and aunts who usually only saw the polished, happy facade. James seized the moment to humiliate me in front of everyone, calling me the family ATM who thinks she's entitled to thanks. The words stung, sharp and deliberate, drawing uncomfortable laughter from the crowd. Daniel smirked like he'd won something, while Sarah looked away, unwilling to confront the mess. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, raw pain rising, but I swallowed the tears. Maybe I was just overreacting, I told myself as I tried a weak retort. I'm just trying to keep us afloat. My voice faltered, lost beneath James's domineering presence. That night, I lay awake, humiliation burning beneath my skin. But I rationalized it. The usual family tensions, the need to keep my dignity intact for Mark and my father. Still, a seed of doubt took root. Could I really keep enduring this silently? The question haunted me, but for now I stayed silent, clinging to the fragile hope that if I just kept being responsible, things might change. The subtle resistance I showed at the barbecue was like a match struck in a dry forest. James wasted no time fanning the flames. Within days, whispers began swirling beneath the surface of every family event, murmurs that felt sharp and cold. At a small neighborhood gathering, I caught snippets of conversations that twisted my words into accusations. "She's selfish," someone said, only thinking of herself and her money. I recognized the voice. It belonged to Mrs. Harlan, a longtime family friend who, despite having no personal stake, seemed to parrot James's venomous narrative with unsettling enthusiasm. These flying monkeys, as Mark called them, had been activated, and they were relentless. At Sunday dinners and holiday brunches, James perfected the art of the silent treatment. I'd sit at the table, invisible to her eyes, as she directed all attention to Daniel and Sarah. When I tried to speak, I was met with thinly veiled disdain or outright dismissal. Worse, the gaslighting began in earnest. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," Sarah once said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why can't you just let things be for once? You're tearing the family apart." Their words echoed in my mind long after the room had emptied, a cruel chorus convincing me I was the problem. Even at work, I wasn't safe. A casual coffee break turned icy when a colleague whispered about rumors regarding my emotional instability. I sensed James had planted seeds there too, clever and poisonous. Mark's presence was my lifeline. When I confided in him late one night, his steady voice cut through the fog. "They're trying to isolate you, Fiona," he warned. "Keep holding onto your truth. Your records, your facts, they're your armor." I clung to that armor, but beneath it, the isolation gnawed at my bones. I was becoming a ghost in my own family, a figure both seen and unseen, castigated yet expected to provide. The betrayal stung deeper than words, but I refused to crumble. If they wanted a war, I'd meet them with quiet strength. For now, I endured, but the battle lines had been drawn unmistakably clear. Hoping to break the cycle, I arranged for a family mediation with Cousin Ellen, a relative known for her fairness and calm demeanor. I prepared carefully, compiling my financial records and emotional accounts, planning to lay everything bare with honesty. When the day came, I spoke with as much steadiness as I could muster. "I've contributed over $50,000 to keep this family afloat," I said, voice firm but not accusatory. "Yet I feel like an outsider, excluded and unappreciated. I want us to find fairness, for all of us." I hoped that facts would pierce through the cloud of resentment and misunderstanding, but James was a master manipulator. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she twisted my words effortlessly. "Fiona's always been controlling," she said, her tone light but cutting. "She demands attention and money, never satisfied. It's exhausting for the rest of us." Daniel nodded in agreement, painting me as a tyrant rather than a giver. Even Cousin Ellen, swayed by their polished performance and the complaints of the golden children, struggled to maintain impartiality. Hours passed in a haze of accusations and deflections until I finally left, feeling the weight of isolation heavier than ever. "You're disrupting the family," James said quietly as I turned to go, her words a dagger disguised as concern. On the drive home, Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. "They're not interested in truth, Fiona. They just want control," he said softly. His words echoed in my mind long after the car stopped. The mediation, meant to heal, had only deepened the rift. I realized that my family's loyalty was not to fairness or honesty, but to preserving a fragile, toxic balance, one that came at my expense. The idea of peace felt more distant than ever, and I knew that if anything was going to change, I'd have to find another way. The next blow came when I least expected it, at my company's annual awards banquet. Standing among colleagues and supervisors I respected, I felt the sting of being passed over for Employee of the Year. The award went to a junior team member I barely knew, someone whose contributions, while commendable, didn't compare to the projects I'd spearheaded. Later, I overheard fragmented conversations, snippets of doubt cast over my professionalism and integrity. James had somehow managed to leak falsehoods to HR, poisoning my reputation with insinuations I couldn't yet fully grasp. The banquet itself was a surreal battlefield. My boss, usually warm and encouraging, offered me a polite but distant smile. Colleagues who once approached me with friendly chatter now skirted around, their eyes flicking with uncertainty, or worse, pity. The humiliation wasn't confined to work. Just days before, at my wedding rehearsal, James had subtly manipulated the guest list, excluding dear friends and close family, casting shadows over what should have been a joyful occasion. The isolation and whispered doubts gnawed at me, eroding the careful confidence I'd nurtured. Mark tried to shield me, standing close during the banquet, whispering reassurances, but even he admitted this was more than simple family drama. They're coordinating this, Fiona. It's calculated. The realization was crushing. The woman who should have been an ally had weaponized my personal and professional worlds against me. I felt myself unraveling quietly, the walls closing in with suffocating pressure. The fight had escalated beyond what I had imagined, and the cost was becoming painfully real. Despite everything, I clung to one last hope. I invited James to dinner, hoping to bridge the divide with honesty and openness. The restaurant was quiet, the dim light casting long shadows as I laid my cards on the table. "I want respect," I said simply, my voice steady but vulnerable. "I want acknowledgement for all I've done, and I want this cycle to end. No more betrayal." For a moment, I thought she might relent. Her eyes softened, lips curving in a practiced smile. But just as I dared to hope, she shifted blame onto me. "You create drama where there is none," she said, voice silky but cold. "You expect too much, Fiona. That's the problem." Her refusal to change hit me like a wave. I realized then that James didn't want peace. She wanted control. The words settled heavily in my chest, an icy truth I could no longer ignore. Mark listened patiently as I voiced the turmoil inside me. "I can't keep bending and breaking," I confessed. "The line has been crossed." This moment crystallized everything. My willingness to forgive had limits, and those limits had been reached. The dinner ended with a fragile silence between us, a chasm yawning wider than ever. James's rejection was clear, her intentions unforgiving. I left the restaurant with a newfound resolve stirring beneath the hurt, a quiet but fierce determination to reclaim my dignity and fight for the respect I deserved. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would no longer be the family's invisible victim. Something inside me had awakened, and it wouldn't be silenced again. After that dinner, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the air thickened by James's relentless campaign to erase me. It wasn't subtle anymore. She had spun a web so intricate that even Daniel and Sarah, my own siblings, were swept into her tide of accusations. I became the betrayer, the source of family drama, the villain in a story I hadn't written. They stopped inviting me to group chats, to casual gatherings, to the very moments that once felt like belonging. My phone, once a lifeline to the family, became silent. Messages left unanswered. Calls ignored. Even the extended family, those distant relatives who had never been close but were once warm enough, now kept their distance, swallowed whole by James's poison. At work, the damage followed swiftly. A whisper campaign, anonymous and sly, found its way to HR. Rumors of emotional instability, questions about my professionalism. They paused my latest projects just as I was gearing up to lead them. Meetings shifted from collaborative to cautious. Colleagues hesitated around me, as if afraid to be tainted by association. The isolation was suffocating, both at home and at work. I questioned everything. Had I misread the signs for so long? Were my sacrifices nothing but a fool's errand? Swallowed by a family that saw me as nothing more than a wallet? Exhaustion curled in my bones like a storm, heavy, relentless. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wrestling with waves of self-doubt and despair. Was I really the problem? Was I destined to be this invisible martyr forever? But in the darkest moments, Mark's voice cut through the noise. "You have the truth, Fiona," he said, gripping my hand like an anchor. That's power they don't have. I clung to those words, fragile but fierce, as a seed of something new began to take root inside me, a steely resolve refusing to be crushed. The family's rejection stung, but it also illuminated the path ahead. I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to believe. Beneath the layers of betrayal, a quiet strength stirred, waiting for its moment, and I knew that moment was coming. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for gratitude, but for me, it turned into a crucible of betrayal that shattered whatever trust I had left. The night before, I found my father in the living room, eyes clouded with confusion, a stack of papers in his trembling hands. James hovered nearby, her expression carefully neutral. As I approached, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, worn down and manipulated, had signed over control of every family account to James, his signature an erasure of me from everything I had supported, every dollar I had quietly given over the years. My heart sank deeper when I learned that James had locked me out of the emergency fund I had built. $20,000, saved and contributed in secret, now vanished from my reach. The confrontation that followed was raw and exposed. I stood in the cold kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, as the weight of the betrayal pressed down on me. Mark was there, steady and silent, his gaze heavy with shared disbelief. A family friend, who had stopped by unexpectedly, overheard the heated exchange, their shocked expression mirroring my own. Tears streamed down my face, but beneath the heartbreak, something inside me cracked, and then hardened. "No more," I whispered into the quiet. Years of invisible labor, financial exploitation, and emotional torment culminated in this moment. I wasn't just hurt. I was done being the scapegoat and the ATM. The loss was devastating, but it ignited a fierce awakening. I vowed to expose the truth, to reclaim my dignity, and to protect what was mine. Standing there, raw and exposed, I felt a cold clarity settle, a promise that this family would no longer control my life or my future. That night, my apartment felt like both a sanctuary and a prison. Quiet stretched around me as I sat alone, the weight of the day pressing down like a stone on my chest. Memories flooded in, late nights covering bills, the crushing silence when my help was ignored, the dismissive glances that never acknowledged my sacrifices. Anger simmered beneath the grief, raw and unfiltered. I recalled James's manipulations, the way she wielded control like a weapon, and the siblings who blindly followed her lead. The clarity was brutal. This family, the ones I had given everything to, never truly valued me. The realization stung, but it brought with it an unexpected power. "I'm more than their scapegoat," I thought fiercely, the phrase echoing in my mind. The anger that rose was not just pain, it was fuel. It sharpened my focus and cleared the fog of self-doubt that had clouded my heart for years. I recognized the pattern of abuse and exploitation for what it was, and with that recognition came a vow: never again. I would no longer allow myself to be diminished, dismissed, or erased. Mark's voice echoed in my mind, steady and unwavering, reminding me of my worth when I struggled to see it myself. This night marked a transformation, from a quiet sufferer to a woman awakening to her own power, ready to fight for the respect and dignity she deserved. The next morning, I met Mark with a new resolve burning in my eyes. "I'm done hiding," I told him, the words tasting like liberation. Together, we began to map out a plan, not impulsive or reckless, but precise and deliberate. We started gathering the mountain of evidence I had painstakingly collected over the years: financial records, text messages, witness statements. "We'll make sure no one can deny what's been done," Mark assured me, his confidence bolstering my own. We decided the moment to confront would be Thanksgiving dinner itself, when all the family and community would be present. The plan was clear: expose James's manipulations, reveal the theft, and force a reckoning that could no longer be ignored. Beyond the family, I prepared to defend my professional reputation. Armed with documented proof of the slander James had sown at work, I planned to approach HR with facts, not emotions. This shift from emotional despair to strategic action was profound. I was no longer a victim swallowed by silence. I was becoming a calculated force for change. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of hope, strength, and control. I was ready to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I sat across from Mark in our cramped living room, a scatter of papers and laptop screens illuminating our quiet war room. We were deep into the anatomy of my family's dependence on me, peeling back layers I hadn't fully seen before. It wasn't just the money I poured into their lives, the loans I quietly made, the bills I covered, and the emergency funds I funded. It was the emotional labor I provided, the invisible thread holding their fragile piece together. James, with all her venom and control, leaned on me more heavily than anyone realized. She depended on my patience to smooth over family conflicts, my financial support to keep her children's lifestyles afloat, and even my professional reputation to bolster her image in social circles and community events where she desperately sought approval. Mark pointed to a spreadsheet I had compiled, eyes sharp. "Look here, James has no independent income. Every cent she spends comes from Dad or from what you've lent them. If you pull back, she's exposed." The truth hit hard. My father, worn down and manipulated, was the puppet James pulled, but the strings were tied to me. I was the lifeline, the bank, and the peacemaker, all wrapped in one invisible package. To verify this, we consulted a financial advisor who explained how I could legally restrict James's access to family assets, especially those Dad had unwittingly signed over. It was a revelation that undercut the narrative that I was the problem or the greedy one. Instead, I was the foundation of their security. Digging deeper, I uncovered suspicious withdrawals from my own accounts. James had been siphoning funds, forging signatures, disguising theft as family expenses. The pattern was clear in my meticulously kept records: altered documents, missing receipts, and inconsistent ledgers. Beyond finances, we compiled messages and testimonies from family friends who had witnessed James's subtle manipulations, but were too afraid or loyal to speak. This inventory wasn't just proof, it was a blueprint of power. I realized I was no longer the powerless scapegoat. I was the axis on which this family turned, the keeper of their financial and social stability. That realization sparked a fire inside me. I was central, indispensable, and finally, I understood how to wield that power. In the weeks before Thanksgiving, I moved quietly, like a shadow slipping unnoticed through familiar halls. My preparation was silent but relentless. Every piece of evidence was backed up in encrypted files, sent to trusted contacts, and locked down under layers of digital security. I met with legal counsel who outlined the possible criminal charges: embezzlement, slander, forgery, and advised on timing and presentation. At work, I discreetly informed a few trusted colleagues who could support me if needed, but kept the volatile truth under wraps. To the outside world, family, friends, co-workers, I was calm, composed, the same dependable Fiona who smiled through every gathering, every meeting, every forced conversation. Mark was my co-conspirator in this quiet storm. Together we set up encrypted communication channels to exchange updates and strategize. I practiced my words, balancing anger with dignity, resolve with grace. We crafted a presentation for Thanksgiving, a moment when the whole family and even some community members would be gathered, a stage where denial and deception would no longer protect James. Meanwhile, James grew careless, her confidence swelling as she believed her control unchallenged. Unbeknownst to her, every step she took was cataloged, every lie countered with proof. My silent preparation built a taut tension, an invisible trap ready to snap. I was ready to strike, but for now, the game was waiting. Then, during a routine online audit of my personal accounts, I found the twist that shattered every assumption. James wasn't just a manipulator or a user, she was a thief. Over the years, unauthorized withdrawals, over $18,000, had vanished from my savings, masked as vague family expenses. The evidence was undeniable. Bank statements showed forged signatures. Receipts I never saw matched purchases I knew nothing about. The betrayal struck deeply, not just financial but profoundly personal. This was a calculated theft, a symbolic erasure of my contributions and trust. My shock quickly morphed into a cold fury. The discovery wasn't just another reason to confront, it was the linchpin of my case. Mark and I worked swiftly to fold this explosive revelation into our plan. The timing was perfect. Thanksgiving would no longer be just a family gathering. It would be a reckoning. The theft was criminal, and exposing it publicly would crack the family's fragile facade wide open. James's veneer of control was paper thin, and now I held the undeniable proof that could force her to confess or face legal consequences. This twist wasn't just a blow to her, it was a seismic shift in our fight. It elevated the stakes from emotional warfare to a battle for justice and truth. I felt the weight of this power settling heavily on my shoulders, but also a fierce clarity. The moment to act was near. The first moves began almost imperceptibly. I stopped covering bills for the family. No more loans. No more bailouts. The silence that followed was deafening. At work, I formally reported James's slander with precise, documented evidence, triggering an internal HR review. She remained oblivious, or so she thought, to the connection between her rumors and the sudden withdrawal of my financial support. The undercurrents shifted. Family members whispered in confusion as resources dried up and favors ceased. I quietly blocked James from my social media, changed passwords on joint accounts, sealing off her access to my digital life. The sting of exclusion I had long endured was now mirrored back at her. James's reaction was subtle at first. Defensiveness, thinly veiled frustration, but she couldn't yet piece together what was unraveling. Daniel and Sarah, caught between loyalty and confusion, started questioning the sudden loss of ease and luxury. Rumors began to swirl about James's controlling behavior, whispered among relatives who had once been silent. The grip she held on the family loosened, just enough to fracture the illusion of unity. I remained calm, measured in my actions, watching the first ripples of consequence spread. The battle had begun, and though they didn't see it yet, the foundation of James's control was cracking. I was no longer the invisible victim. I was the force shaking their carefully constructed world. Thanksgiving dinner arrived like a storm I had been bracing for, the house buzzing with the usual mix of forced pleasantries and strained smiles. The scent of roasted turkey mingled with the faint sharpness of anxiety curled in my chest. Everyone was there. Dad, James, Daniel, Sarah, distant cousins, and even a few family friends. I could feel their eyes flicker over me, some curious, others skeptical, but mostly guarded. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a fragile calm before the inevitable upheaval. I waited for the moment after grace, when the room was quiet and all eyes were on me. I rose, steadying my voice as I asked for everyone's attention. With a crisp breath, I began unfolding the story long buried beneath smiles and silence. I laid out the financial records first, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures that tied directly back to James, the woman who had masqueraded as a mother but acted like a thief. I didn't flinch as murmurs rippled through the room. Then came the documented slander, texts, emails, and witness statements from family friends who had observed James's manipulative whispers, attempts to isolate me socially and professionally. I watched James's face shrink, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of truth. Her lips parted, scrambling for words, but none came. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's gaze turned cold and distant, and the extended family sat frozen, the air heavy with shock. I looked directly at James, my voice calm but unwavering. "You've stolen from me for years and tried to destroy my reputation. Now it's time to face the truth." The room was silent except for my voice, steady and clear. I pulled no punches. From now on, I control what I share and who I trust. This ends today. That declaration felt like a victory cry, a loud, unyielding line drawn in the sand. I was no longer the invisible scapegoat, no longer the woman erased by deceit and favoritism. I was standing tall, the bearer of truth, demanding justice and respect. The family's divided silence was deafening. Some eyes flickered with disbelief, others with grudging understanding, but all acknowledged a new reality. The power had shifted, and I held the reins. The champagne moment I had long dreamed of wasn't just about exposure. It was about reclaiming myself in a world that had tried so hard to diminish me. James's shoulders sagged, her usual dominance stripped bare. She was exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. I felt a cold clarity in that moment, a fierce dignity that steadied me. The room no longer held the weight of my silence, but the burden of her lies. I sat down, the quiet settling like dust after a storm, and for the first time, I felt free. The aftermath of that night hit James like a tidal wave. Almost immediately, family members who had once been silent found their courage, confronting her privately with sharp questions and demands for explanations. The facade she had so carefully maintained began to crack, splintering under the weight of exposure. Her calls to me started the very next day. False apologies dripping with insincerity, promises of change she never intended to keep. The love bombing was desperate and clumsy, an attempt to reel me back into her web, but I was resolute. I refused to engage with her empty words, setting firm boundaries that she couldn't cross. Word traveled quickly beyond the family circle. Extended relatives and longtime family friends began distancing themselves, unwilling to be caught up in James's lies and manipulations. At work, the ripple effect was just as profound. HR escalated their investigations, freezing any accusations leveled against me and opening inquiries into the origin of the slander. My professional reputation, once hanging by a thread, began to stabilize as truth surfaced. Financial institutions, alerted to suspicious activities, started their own reviews. Legal advisors prepared for the possibility of criminal charges against James. The world James had built around control and deceit was crumbling, piece by piece. Throughout this chaotic unraveling, I stood firm. Mark was unwavering by my side, his quiet strength a constant balm. We navigated the storm with cautious optimism, knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but feeling the weight of justice shifting in our favor. James's isolation grew, her social standing and credibility slipping away like sand through fingers. The victory wasn't just personal, it was a public reckoning that protected my future and dismantled the toxic foundation she had built. The consequences cascaded swiftly, a reminder that truth, when wielded with courage, could dismantle even the most entrenched webs of deceit. James didn't surrender easily. In a last frantic bid to regain control, she escalated her tactics into a full-blown onslaught of manipulation. She recruited flying monkeys, family friends and acquaintances she still had influence over, to spread falsehoods, threats, and misinformation designed to shake my resolve. Rumors surfaced, character assassination attempts circulated, and intimidation tactics were deployed in whispers and subtle digs during family events. I knew this was her weapon of last resort, a desperate attempt to provoke conflict and discredit me publicly. But I was no longer the vulnerable target she thought I was. My legal team was primed and watching, every message documented and every threat cataloged. Emotionally, I had built walls fortified by months of hard-fought boundaries. I refused to respond to her provocations, choosing instead to remain composed and focused. Mark helped monitor communications, ensuring my safety and mental steadiness as we navigated the chaos. Each attempt James made to provoke me only deepened her isolation. Her network of loyalists shrank as even her staunchest supporters began to see the toxicity she perpetuated. The family, once divided and confused, started to quietly rally around me. They recognized the pattern of abuse and manipulation for what it was, and their growing support became a subtle but powerful counterweight to James's final acts of desperation. Her efforts to break me failed spectacularly, crumbling her last defenses and marking the definitive collapse of her control. The house of cards she had built on lies toppled, leaving a new foundation, one built on truth, dignity, and resilience. Months have passed since that Thanksgiving, and the air feels lighter now, steady, calm, and full of possibility. Mark and I have grown stronger, bonded by the trials and triumphs we endured together. I've drawn clear, non-negotiable boundaries with my family, limiting contact to respectful, carefully managed interactions. The scars remain, but they no longer define me. My career has rebounded, buoyed by the support of colleagues who admire my resilience and integrity. HR fully cleared my name, and I walk into work each day with a quiet confidence I never thought I'd reclaim. Daniel and Sarah, confronted with the undeniable truth, are beginning tentative steps toward acknowledging my worth, though James remains estranged, a reminder of the past I'm moving beyond. Legal proceedings against her are looming, but they don't consume me. My focus is healing, rebuilding, and living on my own terms. Thanksgiving, once a battleground of betrayal, now symbolizes victory, a testament to endurance and the power of truth. As I sit quietly with Mark one evening, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the window, I feel a peace I've never known. The journey from invisible martyr to empowered woman has been long and jagged, but it has brought me to this place of freedom. I smile, a deep, genuine curve of lips, and say softly, I'm finally living for me. In that moment, the future is no longer a shadow of control or pain, but a horizon bright with hope and the promise of my own choices.